Jake Morrison stood at the large window of his quarters aboard the space station Stellar Heights. He watched the stars move slowly past as the station orbited the Federation's capital world. The view never got old, even after living in space for 3 years. Sometimes he still couldn't believe he was alive again. 200 years ago, he had been a famous actor on Earth. People knew him by a different name back then, but that life felt like a dream now. He had died of old age in 2064, thinking his story was over. Then the Federation's medical technology brought him back in a new body. They said humanity needed representatives who understood both the old Earth and the new galaxy. The door to his quarters made a soft sound as it opened. Lisa Bell walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She had the same story as Jake, once a famous actress, now a Federation diplomat. The scientists had done good work rebuilding their bodies. They looked exactly as they had in their 30s, but with all the memories of their full lives. "You look worried," Lisa said, handing him the coffee. She sat down in the chair next, to the window. Jake took a sip and smiled. Real coffee was hard to find in space, but Lisa always managed to get some. "Just thinking about tomorrow," he said. Tomorrow they would appear on Cosmic Conversations, the most watched show in the galaxy. 50,000 star systems would be watching. It was supposed to be an honor, but Jake had doubts. "I talked to Paul Hayes today," Lisa said. Paul was their diplomatic advisor, a smart man who knew how the Federation really worked. "He's still worried about this interview." Jake nodded. Paul had good reasons to worry. The show's host was Zixthera, a member of the Volockian species. The Volockians thought they were better than everyone else in the galaxy. They had advanced technology and a long history. They looked down on younger species, especially humans. "What did Paul say exactly?" Jake asked. Lisa set down her coffee and looked out at the stars. "He said Zixthera has done this before. He invites representatives from newer species to his show. Then he makes them look stupid in front of the whole galaxy. Why does the Federation let him do that? Because technically, he's not breaking any rules," Lisa said. "He asks real questions about real problems. If the guests can't handle it, that's their fault." Jake understood the game now. This wasn't really about entertainment. It was about politics. Some of the older species in the Federation didn't want humans to have too much influence. If Zixthera could make humans look bad on his show, it would hurt their reputation across the galaxy. "So what do we do?" Jake asked. Lisa smiled, and Jake recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same look she had when facing impossible odds in her old movies. "We show them what humans are really made of." They spent the next few hours going over their notes. Paul Hayes had given them files on every major event in Federation history. They studied the statistics on human contributions to Federation missions. They reviewed the records of human diplomats, scientists, and soldiers. The numbers told an interesting story. Humans had only been in the Federation for 15 years, but they were already involved in more successful missions than species who had been members for centuries. Human-led rescue operations had the best success rates. Human scientists made breakthroughs that had puzzled other species for decades. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to a report on her tablet. Last year, the Crystalline Collective said it was impossible to save the miners trapped on Kepler 442b. The radiation levels were too high, and the tunnels were too unstable. Jake looked at the report. But Captain Amy Foster led a human team in anyway. "And they saved all 300 miners," Lisa finished. "Not just the human miners, all of them, including 50 Volockians. They found more examples. Human doctors, who stayed behind during evacuations to treat alien patients. Human engineers who figured out solutions to problems that had stumped Federation experts. Human soldiers who protected alien civilians at the cost of their own lives." Jake felt something stirring in his chest. Pride, maybe, or determination. These weren't just statistics. These were stories about his people, his species. They deserved respect. "The Volockians think we're primitive," Lisa said. "They think we're too emotional, too violent, too unpredictable." "Maybe we are," Jake said. "But maybe that's not a weakness." Lisa looked at him with interest. What do you mean? Jake stood up and started pacing around the small room. Ideas were forming in his mind. Think about it. The other species in the Federation are very logical. They calculate risks. They make careful decisions. They don't take chances unless success is almost certain. That sounds smart, Lisa said. It is smart, but sometimes smart isn't enough. Jake stopped pacing and looked at her. Sometimes you need someone crazy enough to try anyway, Lisa began, to understand. Someone who will risk everything for a small chance of saving lives. Exactly. The Volocians see that as a flaw. But maybe it's our greatest strength. They worked until late into the night, preparing for the interview. They knew Sixth Era would attack humanity's history. He would bring up the wars, the environmental damage, the social problems, all the mistakes humans had made before joining the Federation. We can't deny our past, Lisa said, but we can explain what it taught us. Jake agreed. Every species had made mistakes during their development. The difference was how they learned from those mistakes. Humans had learned to be better. The next morning they got dressed in their formal Federation uniforms. The clothes were designed to show respect for all member species, with symbols from dozens of different cultures. Jake looked at himself in the mirror. He still looked like the actor from 2 centuries ago, but he felt like someone completely different. Lisa knocked on his door. Ready? She asked. Jake took a deep breath. In a few hours, they would face the most hostile interviewer in the galaxy. Billions of people would be watching. The future of human relations with the other Federation species might depend on how well they handled the next few hours. I'm ready, he said. They walked together toward the shuttle bay. Their ship would take them to the broadcast station in orbit around the capital world. Jake felt nervous but also excited. This was their chance to show the galaxy who humans really were. As they boarded the shuttle, Jake thought about all the humans working across the Federation. The doctors, engineers, diplomats, and soldiers who proved every day that humanity belonged among the stars. Today, he and Lisa would speak for all of them. The shuttle launched into space, carrying them toward what might be the most important conversation in human history. The broadcast studio was bigger than Jake had expected. Rows of seats curved around a central stage, filled with representatives from dozens of different alien species. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange that Jake had to remind himself not to stare. The lighting was bright and warm, designed to make everyone look good on camera. Sixth Era stood at the center of it all. The Volocian host was tall and thin, with pale blue skin that seemed to shine under the studio lights. His eyes were large and dark, and when he smiled, Jake could see rows of sharp teeth. He wore expensive robes covered in symbols that marked his high status in Volocian society. Welcome, welcome, Sixth Era said as Jake and Lisa walked onto the stage. His voice was smooth and pleasant, but something about it made Jake uncomfortable. The famous humans from ancient Earth. What an honor to have you here. The audience clapped politely. Jake noticed that some species clapped with their hands, others made clicking sounds, and a few just glowed brighter for a moment. The diversity of the Federation never stopped amazing him. They sat down in comfortable chairs across from Sixth Era. The cameras floated silently around them, sending their images across 50,000 star systems. Jake tried not to think about how many billions of people were watching. So, Sixth Era began, tell our audience about your previous lives. You were entertainers on Earth, correct? In the primitive entertainment industry of the early 21st century? Lisa smiled calmly. We were actors, yes. We made movies that told stories about human experiences. Love, loss, adventure, hope. How quaint, Sixth Era said. The way he said it made it sound like an insult. And now you represent your entire species in Federation politics. Quite a change from playing pretend for cameras. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice steady. Acting taught us a lot about understanding different perspectives. That skill has been useful in diplomacy. I'm sure it has, Sixth Era said. Now let's talk about human culture. Your species has such interesting ideas about entertainment. Violence, conflict, drama, very different from the peaceful pursuits of more advanced civilizations. He gestured to a large screen behind them. Images began to appear showing scenes from old Earth movies. Explosions, car chases, fights, and shootouts filled the screen. The audience murmured among themselves. "This is what humans consider entertainment," Zixthera said. "Constant violence and destruction. What does this say about your species' mindset?" Lisa leaned forward slightly. "Those stories often showed people overcoming impossible odds to protect others. The violence wasn't the point. The courage was." "Courage, yes," Zixthera said. "Humans do seem obsessed with this concept. Tell me, why do you think your species values such reckless behavior?" The question was clearly designed to make humans sound stupid and dangerous. Jake could see the trap, but he answered honestly, "Because sometimes courage is the only thing standing between innocent people and disaster." Zixthera's smile grew wider. "How fascinating. And speaking of disaster, let's look at your species' history before joining the Federation." The screen behind them changed. Now it showed images from Earth's past: wars, pollution, poverty, and destruction. Jake recognized some of the footage from history classes he had watched as a child, centuries ago. It looked even worse on the big screen with an alien audience watching. "This is your homeworld," Zixthera said, his voice full of fake sympathy. "Constant warfare, environmental destruction, social inequality, millions of people suffering while others lived in luxury. And you want us to believe that such a barbaric species has something valuable to offer the Federation?" The audience was completely quiet now. Jake could feel their eyes on him and Lisa. Some looked curious, others seemed disgusted. A few appeared to be enjoying the show. Lisa's voice remained calm, but Jake could hear steel underneath. "Every species goes through difficult periods in their development. What matters is how we learn and grow from those experiences." "Do you, though?" Zixthera asked. "Because from what I see, humans brought those same violent tendencies into space. Your military forces are involved in more conflicts than any other Federation species." More images appeared on the screen. Human soldiers in combat gear, Federation ships with human crews engaged in battles, scenes from recent conflicts across the galaxy. The host was building his case methodically, making humans look like warmongers. Jake knew they had to be careful here. If they sounded too defensive, it would make them look guilty. If they didn't defend themselves at all, the audience would think Zixthera was right. "Human forces are involved in many conflicts," Jake said. "Usually because we're the ones willing to help when others won't." "Help?" Zixthera laughed, and the sound was not pleasant. "Is that what you call it? Let me show you some examples of human help." The screen now showed footage from the Battle of Rigel 7. Human ships were fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. Bodies floated in space. Explosions lit up the darkness. It looked like senseless violence and destruction. 3,000 beings died in this battle, Zixthera said, all because humans refused to negotiate a peaceful settlement. Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Zixthera was twisting the truth, and Jake knew it. That battle happened because the Rigel pirates were holding 50,000 civilians hostage. They demanded that the Federation abandon the entire sector. Other species were willing to negotiate. Humans weren't willing to sacrifice innocent lives. "So you chose war instead," Zixthera said. "We chose to save the hostages," Lisa said. "All 50,000 of them, including members of your own species, I believe." For just a moment, Zixthera's smile flickered, but he recovered quickly. "The point is that humans always choose violence as their first option. This makes you unsuitable for leadership positions. In a peaceful federation." Jake could see where this was heading. Zixthera was building a case that humans were too primitive and violent to be trusted with important responsibilities. If enough people believed it, human influence in the Federation would be severely limited. The host turned to face the audience, directly. "My fellow beings, we must ask ourselves a serious question. Do we really want to give more power to a species that solves every problem with weapons? A species that sees violence as entertainment? A species whose own homeworld nearly died from their destructive tendencies? Some members of the audience were nodding now. Jake could see doubt and fear in their faces. Zixthera was winning, and he knew it. Perhaps, the host continued, it would be better if humans remained in a more limited role within the Federation. Important enough to feel included, but not so important that they can drag the rest of us into their violent conflicts. The trap was complete. Zixthera had painted humans as dangerous primitives who couldn't be trusted with real responsibility. He had used their own history against them and twisted their greatest victories into evidence of their weakness. Jake looked at Lisa. She met his eyes and gave a tiny nod. It was time to fight back. Lisa stood up slowly from her chair. The movement was so calm and confident that the entire studio fell silent. Even Zixthera seemed surprised by her reaction. He had expected anger or desperate denials, not this quiet dignity. You're absolutely right, Lisa said, her voice clear and steady. Humans have made terrible mistakes throughout our history. Jake felt his heart skip a beat. What was she doing? But then he saw the look in her eyes and understood. This wasn't surrender. This was strategy. We fought wars that killed millions. Lisa continued, walking slowly toward the center of the stage. We poisoned our air and water. We let people starve while others lived in luxury. We did all of these things and we're not proud of them. The audience was completely focused on her now. Even the floating cameras moved closer to capture every word. Zixthera's smile was starting to fade as he realized this wasn't going according to his plan. But here's what I find interesting, Lisa said, stopping directly in front of the host. You talk about these mistakes as if they make us unique, as if no other species in the Federation has ever faced similar challenges. She turned to address the audience directly. How many of your species went through periods of warfare during your development? How many struggled with environmental problems as your populations grew? How many had to learn painful lessons about equality and justice? Jake watched as uncomfortable looks spread across the faces in the audience. Lisa was right, and everyone knew it. Every species had difficult chapters in their history. The difference, Lisa said, isn't that humans made mistakes. The difference is what we did about them. She gestured to the screen behind her, which still showed images of Earth's environmental damage. When we saw what we were doing to our planet, we didn't just accept it as inevitable. We changed. We developed new technologies, we created new laws. We transformed our entire civilization to fix the problems we had created. Jake stood up to join her. He understood now what she was doing, and he was ready to help. Other species often abandon problems that seem too difficult to solve. Humans have a different approach. Oh, really? Zixthera said, trying to regain control of the interview. And what approach is that? We fix them, Jake said simply. Even when everyone else says it's impossible. Lisa walked over to a control panel near the host's desk. May I? She asked politely. Without waiting for an answer, she began accessing the Federation's database. What are you doing? Zixthera demanded. Showing our audience some recent Federation statistics, Lisa said. Facts that you somehow forgot to mention in your presentation. The screen behind them changed. Now it showed data from the past 10 years of Federation operations. Rescue missions, scientific expeditions, diplomatic negotiations, and humanitarian efforts. The numbers were color-coded by species, and one color appeared far more often than the others. This is interesting, Jake said, studying the display. Humans make up less than 2% of the Federation's population, but we're involved in 37% of successful rescue operations, and 42% of breakthrough scientific discoveries, Lisa added, including the cure for Andorian fever that saved over 1 million lives last year. Zixthera's face was changing color, shifting from pale blue to a darker shade that Jake guessed meant embarrassment or anger. Statistics can be manipulated to support any argument, he said weakly. You're right, Lisa agreed. So let's look at specific examples instead. She touched the control panel again, and the screen showed a detailed report from the recent crisis on Kepler 442b, the mining disaster that had trapped 300 workers in collapsed tunnels filled with deadly radiation. The crystalline, Collective declared the situation hopeless, Lisa said. Their experts calculated that any rescue attempt had less than a 5% chance of success. They recommended writing off the miners as casualties. Jake picked up the story. But Captain Amy Foster disagreed. She led a human rescue team into those tunnels anyway. They worked for 18 hours straight, using new techniques that our engineers developed on the spot. The result? Lisa asked, looking directly at Zixathara. All 300 miners rescued, 0 casualties, including 50 members of your own species, I believe. The host said nothing. Jake could see several Valachians in the audience shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Lisa brought up another report. Or how about the diplomatic crisis on Tau Ceti? 5 different Federation negotiators had tried and failed to prevent a civil war. The situation was considered impossible to resolve peacefully. But Ambassador Kate Rivers had a different idea, Jake said. Instead of negotiating with the leaders who were causing the problem, she went directly to the people who were suffering from it. She spent 3 months living in refugee camps, learning their stories, understanding their real needs. The result was a peace agreement that has lasted for 5 years, Lisa said. A solution that everyone said was impossible. She continued, bringing up examples. Human doctors who stayed behind during evacuations to treat alien patients. Human scientists who solved problems that had puzzled Federation experts for decades. Human soldiers who protected civilian populations at enormous personal risk. You see a pattern here? Jake asked the audience. When other species say something is impossible, humans tend to try anyway. When other species calculate that the risks are too high, humans focus on what they might save rather than what they might lose. Zixathara finally found his voice again. This is exactly the problem. Humans are recklessly optimistic. You take unnecessary risks. You refuse to accept logical limitations. This kind of thinking will eventually lead to disaster for the entire Federation. Lisa smiled, and Jake recognized the expression. It was the same look she used to get in her old movies when she was about to deliver the perfect comeback. You know what, Zixathara? You might be right, she said. Maybe we are recklessly optimistic. Maybe we do take unnecessary risks. Maybe we should be more logical and careful like the other Federation species. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. The studio was completely silent, but if we had been more logical and careful, those 300 miners would be dead right now. If we had accepted limitations, millions of beings would have died from Andorian fever. If we had been less recklessly optimistic, Tau Ceti would still be at war. Jake stepped forward to stand beside her. You call it reckless optimism. We call it hope. You call it unnecessary risk-taking. We call it doing what's right, even when it's hard. And maybe, Lisa said, looking directly into the main camera, maybe the galaxy needs a little more of that kind of recklessness. The audience was completely quiet now, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Jake could see thinking faces, considering expressions. Some of the aliens were looking at their fellow audience members as if seeing them in a new light. Zixathara realized he was losing control of the narrative. His carefully planned attack on humanity was backfiring. Instead of making humans look primitive and dangerous, Jake and Lisa were making them look brave and necessary. The host tried one more desperate attack. But surely you must admit that human emotionalism makes you unsuitable for leadership positions. Logic should guide Federation decisions, not feelings and sentiment. Lisa and Jake exchanged a look. They both knew this was the moment that would define the rest of the interview. Everything depended on how they answered this final challenge. Jake stepped forward, ready to explain why human emotion might be exactly what the galaxy needed. Jake looked out at the audience, then back at Zixathara. The host was waiting for an answer about human emotions and leadership. This was the moment that could decide everything. You want to talk about emotion versus logic? Jake asked. Let me tell you about the Battle of Draconis Prime. He walked over to the control panel that Lisa had been using. The screen behind them changed to show a star map of the Draconis system. Red warning symbols flashed around 3 planets. 2 years ago, the Draconi invasion fleet attacked 3 Federation colonies simultaneously, Jake said. 50,000 Draconi warships against our border defenses. The Federation High Command ran the numbers through their computers. Lisa picked up the story. The logical conclusion was clear. The colonies couldn't be defended. The smart move was to evacuate as many people as possible and abandon the worlds to the invaders. Most Federation species agreed with this assessment. Jake continued. The Wallachian fleet withdrew to defensive positions. The crystalline collective ships retreated to protect their core worlds. The logical choice was to save what they could and accept the loss. Zixathara's face was getting darker blue. He clearly didn't like where this story was going. The Federation made a strategic withdrawal to preserve resources for a counterattack. That was the logical decision. Maybe it was logical, Jake agreed, but Admiral Tony Blake didn't see it that way. The screen showed the image of a middle-aged human in a Federation uniform. He had gray hair and tired eyes, but there was something determined in his expression. Admiral Blake commanded the human fleet in that sector, Lisa said. When he received the withdrawal order, he sent back a very short message. Unable to comply, civilians in danger. Jake touched the control panel, and the screen showed the actual battle recordings. Human ships, outnumbered 50-1, fighting, desperately against massive alien warships. Explosions lit up the darkness of space as the tiny human fleet tried to hold the line. The logical choice would have been to retreat, Jake said. Blake's ships were going to be destroyed. His crews were going to die. There was no chance of victory. But Admiral Blake wasn't thinking about logic, Lisa added. He was thinking about the 3 million people on those planets, families with children, elderly people who couldn't be evacuated in time, people who were counting on the Federation to protect them. The battle footage continued playing. Human ships were being destroyed one by one, but they kept fighting. Some ships rammed into larger enemy vessels when their weapons failed. Others used their own hulls to shield civilian evacuation ships. For 6 hours, Blake's fleet held the line, Jake said. 6 hours that shouldn't have been possible. The Draconi couldn't understand why the humans wouldn't retreat, why they kept fighting when defeat was certain. Zixathara tried to interrupt. This just proves my point about human recklessness. Blake's fleet was completely destroyed. It was a waste of lives and resources. Lisa turned to face him directly. Was it? Let's see what happened next. The screen changed to show a different part of the battle. New ships were appearing at the edge of the system. Lots of them. Blake's stand gave the evacuation fleets time to escape, Lisa said. But it also did something else. It sent a message across the entire galaxy. The message was simple. Humans don't abandon their friends. Jake smiled as he watched the screen. Ships started arriving from everywhere, not just human ships, Altarian cruisers, Centauri destroyers, even some Wallachian vessels decided to join the fight. The crews of those ships said the same thing, Lisa continued. If humans were willing to die for people they'd never met, maybe those people were worth saving. The screen now showed the tide of battle turning. What had started as a hopeless last stand became a massive rescue operation. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species worked together to evacuate the colonies. In the end, over 2.5 million people were saved, Jake said. People from 23 different species, including 50,000 Wallachians. Zixathara was quiet now. Several Wallachians in the audience were looking at their hands, clearly remembering family members or friends who had been on those worlds. Admiral Blake didn't survive the battle, Lisa said softly. Neither did most of his crews, but their sacrifice saved millions of lives and brought the galaxy together in a way that no logical strategy ever could. Jake walked closer to the host. You asked about emotion versus logic. Here's what I think. Logic tells you what's possible, emotion tells you what's necessary. The logical choice was to accept defeat and minimize losses, Lisa added. The emotional choice was to fight for every life, no matter the cost. Which choice saved more people? The audience was completely silent. Many of them were looking at each other with new understanding. Some species that had always thought humans were too emotional were starting to see the value in that emotion. Jake brought up another display on the screen. Let's look at some more recent examples. 6 months ago, the research station on Europa 7 lost life support. The station had 43 scientists from 12 different species. The logical response was to send a rescue ship, Lisa said. Estimated travel time, 8 days. The scientists had enough emergency air for 5 days. But Dr. Sarah Kim had a different idea, Jake continued. She was working on a completely different project, but she heard about the crisis. Instead of waiting for the rescue ship, she took her experimental shuttle and made the run in 3 days. The screen showed the dangerous flight path that Dr. Kim had taken. She had flown through an asteroid field and skipped off the atmosphere of a gas giant to save time. The computer calculated her chances of survival at 12%. Dr. Kim didn't make that flight because it was logical, Lisa said. She made it because 43 people were going to die if someone didn't try something impossible. And she succeeded, Jake added. All 43 scientists were rescued, including the team leader, who happened to be Volockian. Zixathera finally spoke up again, but his voice was weaker than before. These are isolated incidents. You can't base Federation policy on emotional decisions and lucky outcomes. Lisa accessed another file on the system. Isolated incidents? Let's see about that. The screen filled with data showing human involvement in Federation operations over the past 5 years. Rescue missions, scientific breakthroughs, diplomatic successes, and military victories. The pattern was clear. When other species said something was impossible, humans often proved them wrong. Here's what the data shows, Jake said. Missions led by humans have a success rate that's 40% higher than the Federation average. Not because we're smarter or stronger, but because we're willing to try when others won't. Human crews volunteer for the most dangerous assignments, Lisa added. We take the missions that other species consider too risky, and we succeed more often than we fail. Jake looked directly at Zixathera. You want to talk about leadership? Leadership isn't about making the safe choice. It's about making the right choice, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, Lisa agreed. The host was clearly struggling now. His careful plan to discredit humanity was falling apart. Instead of looking primitive and dangerous, humans were starting to look like the kind of people you wanted on your side when things got difficult. But Zixathera had one more card to play. Jake could see it in his eyes. The host was getting ready for a final desperate attack, something that would try to turn the audience against humanity once and for all. Jake braced himself for what was coming next. Zixathera straightened up in his chair. Jake could see the host gathering himself for one final attack. The Volockian's eyes had a desperate look now, like someone who knew they were losing but refused to give up. Very touching stories, Zixathera said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. But let's talk about the real problem with human leadership. Your species is dangerously optimistic. You refuse to accept reality when it doesn't match your hopes. He stood up and walked to the center of the stage. This reckless optimism will eventually doom the entire Federation. You'll lead us into disasters because you can't accept that. Some things are truly impossible. Jake felt the mood in the studio shift slightly. This was a clever attack because it sounded reasonable. Many species in the galaxy valued caution and careful planning. The idea of reckless optimism leading to disaster would worry them. Let me give you an example, Zixathera continued. The human terraforming project on New Mars. Your scientists insisted they could turn a dead world into a garden paradise. Every other species told you it was impossible. The soil was too poisonous, the atmosphere was too thin, the weather patterns were too unstable. The screen behind them showed images of New Mars during the early terraforming attempts. It looked like a nightmare world of dust storms and toxic clouds. Nothing could survive there for more than a few minutes. Logical species would have given up, Zixathera said. But humans kept trying. You poured resources into that project for 15 years. Billions of credits, thousands of workers. All for a dream that could never come true. Lisa was very still now. Jake could see her thinking, choosing her words carefully. This was a dangerous moment because Zixathera was partially right. New Mars had been an extremely expensive project with no guarantee of success. And what happened? The host asked, spreading his arms wide. After 15 years of effort, what do you have to show for it? A barely habitable world where only the hardiest colonists can survive. Hardly the paradise you promised. Some members of the audience were nodding. Jake could see doubt creeping back into their faces. Maybe humans really were too optimistic for their own good. But then Lisa smiled. It was a quiet, confident smile that made Jake's heart lift. She walked over to the control panel and began entering commands. "You're absolutely right about Mars," she said calmly. "It took 15 years longer than we expected. It cost more than we planned. And the final result wasn't exactly what we originally promised." The screen changed to show recent images of new Mars. Jake had seen these pictures before, but they still took his breath away. Rolling green hills, crystal clear lakes, cities nestled in valleys filled with flowering trees. It looked like paradise. "This is new Mars today," Lisa said. "Home to 12 million people from 37 different species. The agricultural centers produce enough food to feed 6 other worlds. The research facilities have developed new medical treatments that work across species barriers." The audience was staring at the screen in amazement. Even Jake, who knew the story, was impressed by how beautiful the world had become. "But you're right," Lisa continued. "It did take longer than expected. And it did cost more than planned. And the final result wasn't exactly what we originally promised." She paused, looking directly at Sandra. "It was better." Jake stepped forward to join her. "The original plan was to create a world where humans could live. But during those 15 years of work, we learned things we never expected. We developed new techniques for soil restoration that work on any world. We created atmospheric processors that can be used anywhere. We figured out how to build cities that work for dozens of different species. Those techniques have been used to restore damaged worlds throughout the Federation," Lisa added. "Worlds that were written off as permanently destroyed are now thriving again. All because humans refuse to accept that some things are impossible." She brought up more data on the screen. Reports from worlds across the galaxy that had been restored using techniques developed on new Mars. The numbers were impressive. Dozens of worlds, billions of lives improved. "You see this as reckless optimism," Jake said to Sandra. "We see it as hope. Hope that things can be better than they are. Hope that problems have solutions even if we don't know what those solutions are yet." Lisa turned to address the camera directly, speaking to the billions of people watching across the galaxy. Every great achievement in galactic history started with someone refusing to accept that something was impossible. The first warp drive, the cure for the Red Death Plague, the peace treaty that ended the sector wars. All of these things happened because someone had hope. And yes, Jake added, also looking into the camera, sometimes hope leads to failure. Sometimes our optimism gets us into trouble. Sometimes we try things that don't work and waste time and resources. "But," Lisa said, her voice growing stronger, "without hope, nothing great ever happens. Without optimism, we never try to make things better. Without the belief that impossible things might be possible, we never discover new solutions to old problems." Jake saw something changing in the audience. The doubt was fading from their faces, replaced by something else. Understanding, maybe, or even inspiration. "The galaxy has plenty of species that are logical and careful," Lisa continued. "Species that calculate risks and make safe choices. And that's valuable. We need that kind of thinking." "But," Jake said, "the galaxy also needs someone who looks at impossible problems and says, 'Let's try anyway.' Someone who sees a dying world and imagines a garden. Someone who hears that 3 million people are in danger and decides that's not acceptable." Lisa walked closer to Sandra. "You're afraid of human optimism because you think it's dangerous. But I want to ask you something. When was the last time your species attempted something that seemed impossible? When was the last time Velokians tried to solve a problem that everyone said couldn't be solved?" The host opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. Jake could see him thinking, trying to come up with an example. But nothing came. "That's the difference between us," Jake said gently. "Not that we're better or worse than other species, just that we're willing to try things that might not work. We're willing to fail in pursuit of something greater. And sometimes, Lisa said. We succeed in ways that surprise everyone, including ourselves. She gestured to the screen which still showed the beautiful images of New Mars. 15 years ago, that world was dead. Today, it's home to millions of people who live better lives because someone refused to give up. Jake looked out at the audience. That's what human optimism really means. It's not about being unrealistic or ignoring problems. It's about believing that we can find solutions to problems that haven't been solved yet. It's about hope, Lisa said simply. The studio was completely quiet, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence from earlier. This was the silence of people thinking deeply about what they had heard. Sandra stood in the center of the stage, looking lost. His carefully planned attack on humanity had not just failed, it had backfired completely. Instead of making humans look dangerous and primitive, he had given them the perfect opportunity to explain why the galaxy needed human hope and optimism. Jake could see the moment when the host realized what had happened. Sandra's face went from dark blue to almost white. He looked out at the audience and saw the change in their expressions. They weren't looking at humans with suspicion anymore. They were looking at them with respect, and maybe even a little envy. The trap had been turned completely around, and now it was time for the final blow. The silence in the studio stretched on for what felt like forever. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in the quiet. Every eye in the audience was focused on the stage, waiting to see what would happen next. Sandra stood frozen in the center of the stage. His pale blue skin had gone almost white, and his large dark eyes darted between Jake, Lisa, and the audience. The confident host who had started the interview was gone. In his place was someone who clearly didn't know what to do. Lisa walked over to her chair and sat down calmly. "Is there anything else you'd like to ask us?" she said to Sandra. The host opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked around the studio as if he was hoping someone would help him. But no one moved. The cameras kept floating silently, around the stage, broadcasting everything to 50,000 star systems. Jake joined Lisa in his chair. "We're here to answer questions about humanity and our role in the Federation," he said. "What would you like to know?" For the first time since the interview started, Sandra seemed to have lost the ability to speak. He had spent so much time planning his attack that he hadn't prepared for what to do if it failed. Finally, a voice came from the audience. A small green-skinned being in the front row raised her hand. "May I ask a question?" Jake looked at Sandra, who just nodded weakly. "Of course," Jake said. The alien stood up. Jake recognized her as a member of the Altarian delegation. "My name is Dr. Vera Quill. I work at the medical research station on Altair Prime. 6 months ago, when the plague outbreak started, everyone said it was hopeless. The disease was spreading too fast, and we didn't understand how it worked." She paused, looking around at the other audience members. "But a team of human doctors came anyway. They worked for weeks without sleep, trying treatments that had never been tested. Most experts said they were wasting their time." Lisa leaned forward with interest. "What happened?" "They found a cure," Dr. Quill said simply. "Not just a treatment, but a complete cure. They saved over 1 million lives on our world alone." When I asked the lead doctor why they had tried so hard for a hopeless cause, she said something I'll never forget. The doctor sat back down, but her voice carried clearly through the studio. She said, "Because giving up means accepting that people have to die, and humans don't accept that." Another voice spoke up from the middle of the audience. A tall, silver-skinned being stood up. "I am Commander Rex Volt of the Centauri Defense Force. 3 years ago, my ship was attacked by pirates near the Vega system. We were outnumbered 10-1 and our engines were damaged." He looked directly at Jake and Lisa. "A human patrol ship received our distress call. The logical thing would have been to call for backup and wait for reinforcements. Instead, they came immediately to help us, even though they were outnumbered too." Jake remembered hearing about this incident. "Captain Jennifer Ross, right?" "Yes," Commander Volt nodded. "She saved my crew, but that's not why I'm telling this story. What impressed me was what she said afterward. When I thanked her for taking such a big risk for strangers, she looked at me like I had said something very strange. She said, 'They weren't strangers. They were people who needed help. More voices began speaking up from around the audience. A crystalline engineer talked about human scientists who had solved problems that had puzzled her people for generations. A draconian merchant described human diplomats who had prevented a trade war through pure determination and creativity. Jake listened to story after story, feeling a warm pride growing in his chest. These weren't just statistics or reports. These were personal experiences from beings who had seen humans at their best. A young Volockian in the back row stood up. Jake noticed that Sandra looked embarrassed when he saw who was speaking. "My name is Keanu. I was one of the miners trapped on Kepler 442b. The young Volockian's voice was clear and strong. "When the tunnels collapsed, our own rescue teams said we were already dead. The radiation levels were too high, and the structure was too unstable. They told our families to prepare for the worst." He looked directly at his host, Sandra. But Captain Amy Foster didn't listen to the experts. She brought her team into those tunnels and spent 18 hours finding ways to reach us. When she finally got to my section, I asked her why she had risked her life for people she didn't even know. Kaital paused, and Jake could see tears in his eyes. She said, "Because every life matters, no matter what species it belongs to." Then she carried me out on her back because I was too weak to walk. The studio was completely quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the uncomfortable tension from earlier. It was the silence of people who were deeply moved by what they were hearing. Sandra finally found his voice, again. "These are all very touching stories," he said, but his tone was weak and defeated. "But they don't change the fundamental questions about human leadership in the Federation." An elderly being near the front of the audience slowly stood up. Jake recognized him as Ambassador Chen Locke, one of the most respected diplomats in the galaxy. The old ambassador had been mediating disputes between species for over a century. "Actually," Ambassador Locke said in his quiet, careful voice, "I think they do." He turned to address the entire audience. "I have worked with representatives from every species in this room. I have seen how we all handle crises, how we make decisions, how we treat other beings who are different from ourselves." The ambassador looked at Jake and Lisa. "What I have learned is that true leadership isn't about being the smartest or the strongest or the most logical. True leadership is about caring enough to try when others have given up. It's about seeing hope where others see only problems." He gestured around the studio. "Every story we've heard today has the same theme. When situations seemed hopeless, humans found ways to help anyway. When others calculated that success was impossible, humans tried anyway. When logic said to give up, humans chose hope instead." Ambassador Locke sat back down, but his words continued to echo in the studio. "Perhaps the question isn't whether humans are ready for leadership roles in the Federation. Perhaps the question is whether the Federation is ready for the kind of leadership that humans represent." Jake felt something shift in the air of the studio. He could see it in the faces of the audience members. The suspicion and doubt were gone, replaced by something that looked like admiration, and maybe even inspiration. Sandra made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "But surely you must see the dangers of this approach. What happens when human optimism leads to real disaster? What happens when hope isn't enough?" Lisa stood up one final time. She walked over to the main camera and looked directly into it, speaking to the billions of people watching across the galaxy. "Hope isn't a guarantee," she said simply. "It's a choice. The choice to believe that things can be better than they are. The choice to keep trying when others have stopped. The choice to care about people you've never met and may never see again." She paused, looking around the studio one more time. "And yes, sometimes hope isn't enough. Sometimes we fail despite our best efforts. Sometimes the impossible stays impossible." Jake joined her in front of the camera. "But the alternative to hope is despair. The alternative to trying is giving up. And humans learned a long time ago that giving up is the only true failure." "So we choose hope," Lisa said. "Not because it's logical or safe or guaranteed to work, but because hope is what makes impossible things possible. Hope is what turns dreams into reality." Hope is what saves lives when everything else has failed. The camera pulled back to show the entire studio. The audience was completely silent, but Jake could see the impact of their words in every face. Even Zixathera looked thoughtful now, as if he was seeing humans clearly for the first time. That's what humanity offers the Federation, Jake said. Not just our technology or our military or our science. We offer hope. The hope that problems have solutions. The hope that people can change and grow and become better than they were. The hope that the future can be brighter than the past. Lisa smiled. And if that makes us recklessly optimistic, then we're proud to be reckless. The interview was over, but no one moved. The studio remained quiet for a long moment as everyone absorbed what they had heard. Then, slowly, one person began to clap, then another. Soon the entire audience was applauding, not just with their hands, but with whatever methods their species used to show approval. Even some of the Valachians were clapping, and in the front row, Jake could see tears streaming down the face of the young miner that Captain Foster had saved. Zixathera looked around the studio one last time, then quietly walked off the stage. His plan to humiliate humanity had failed completely. Instead, he had given them the perfect platform to show the galaxy who they really were and what they stood for. As Jake and Lisa left the studio, they knew that everything had changed. The interview would be replayed across the galaxy for years to come. And every time someone watched it, they would understand a little better why humanity belonged among the stars. Hope, it turned out, was the most powerful force in the universe.